Its people were angry, humiliated, and desperate for answers. And into that chaos stepped a man with no power, no position, only words. A failed artist. A prisoner. Stay with me. Because once you understand how Adolf Hitler gained power, you'll understand why history keeps warning us, and why it keeps being ignored. This is the story of how a nobody convinced a nation to follow him, and how everything was. I'm 78 years old now, and I've spent most of my life reading about people who believed time was on their side. Adolf Hitler was one of them. When you study him long enough, you stop seeing a monster who appeared out of nowhere. You see a man who waited, calculated, failed, waited again, and then took advantage of a moment when a wounded nation was desperate to believe in someone. I'm speaking as someone who has watched the 20th century age along with me. I was born after his fall, but I grew up in its shadow. The ruins were still there. The silence was still there. And the question never really left. How did he gain so much power, and how did he lose absolutely everything? Hitler did not begin as a leader. He began as a man with no clear direction. Born in 1889 in Austria, he drifted through his early years angry, stubborn, and convinced the world had denied him something he deserved. He wanted to be an artist. He failed twice, rejected by the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. Those rejections mattered more than they should have. They hardened him. They gave him someone to blame. Vienna shaped him in darker ways too. The city was full of political tension, nationalism, and anti-Semitic ideas that were already floating through Europe. Hitler didn't invent these hatreds. He absorbed them. He carried them like unfinished arguments, waiting for the right audience. The First World War gave him that audience, even if he didn't know it yet. He volunteered for the German army and found something he had never really had before: structure, purpose, and belonging. Germany's defeat in 1918 shattered him. Like many others, he believed the loss was a betrayal, not a failure. This lie became the foundation of everything that followed. After the war, Germany was humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles. The economy collapsed. Inflation destroyed savings. People were desperate, angry, and afraid. When a society feels cornered, it looks for simple explanations and strong voices. Hitler discovered he had such a voice.
He joined a small political group that would later become the Nazi Party. At first, he was just a speaker, but he understood something important. Facts mattered less than emotion. He spoke about pride, revenge, unity, and enemies within. He gave people someone to blame and promised to restore what they believed had been stolen. In 1923, he tried to take power by force in the beer hall putsch. It failed. He was arrested and sent to prison. This should have been the end of him. Instead, it became a turning point. In prison, he wrote Mein Kampf, laying out his ideology in plain, disturbing terms. More importantly, he learned patience. Power, he realized, could be taken legally and then reshaped from within. When he was released, Germany was still unstable. The Great Depression struck in 1929, and millions lost their jobs. Democratic institutions looked weak. Hitler presented himself as the solution. The Nazis used propaganda relentlessly. Posters, rallies, radio broadcasts. Hitler didn't promise complexity. He promised certainty. By 1933, he was appointed Chancellor of Germany, not elected by a majority, but invited in by political elites who believed they could control him. This is one of history's quietest mistakes. They thought they were using him. He was already planning to remove them. Once in power, Hitler moved quickly. The Reichstag fire gave him an excuse to suspend civil liberties. Opposition parties were banned. Trade unions were dissolved. Within months, Germany was no longer a democracy. It barely noticed the moment it stopped being one. He called himself Führer, leader. Loyalty to him became loyalty to the state. The machinery of terror was built step by step. The SS, the Gestapo, the camps. At first, they were for political enemies. Then they were for anyone deemed undesirable. Each step was justified as necessary, temporary, protective. Anti-Semitism moved from words to law, then to violence, then to systematic murder. The Holocaust was not a sudden explosion of cruelty. It was an organized, bureaucratic process carried out by ordinary people following orders, filling forms, driving trains. That is the part that still chills me. At the height of his power, Hitler controlled most of Europe. Crowds cheered him. Generals saluted him. He believed himself chosen by history, and that belief became his undoing.
He ignored advice. He trusted his instincts over reality. The invasion of the Soviet Union was driven by ideology more than strategy. It stretched Germany too far. The United States entered the war. The tide turned slowly, then all at once. He ignored advice. He trusted his instincts over reality. The invasion of the Soviet Union was driven by ideology more than strategy. It stretched Germany too far. The United States entered the war. The tide turned slowly, then all at once. As defeat approached, Hitler withdrew from the world. He lived underground, surrounded by maps that no longer matched reality. Cities were burning. Millions were dead. Still, he blamed others, generals, civilians, fate. Never himself. In April 1945, with Berlin collapsing around him, Adolf Hitler killed himself in a bunker. A man who promised 1,000-year Reich left behind a continent in ruins and graves that still cannot be counted without losing your breath. What stays with me after all these years is how ordinary the beginning was. No thunder, no prophecy, just a failed man in a broken country telling people what they wanted to hear and being believed long enough to destroy everything. I've lived long enough to know this story is never really over. It changes names, uniforms, accents. The details shift, but the pattern remains. Power gained through fear is always temporary, and the cost is always paid by those who never asked for it. That is how Adolf Hitler gained power, and that is how he lost everything.